My fellow pilots, good morning. As your Vice President of Finance, let's talk about something exciting like finances. I'm proud to report to you today that your union is on sound financial footing. Now, many of you have been around long enough to remember when that wasn't the case, but we are indeed on sound financial footing thanks to the collective efforts of everybody in this room in managing our pilots' money. However, we can't rest on those results and assume that our strengthening financial position will go on into perpetuity, which is why we continue to practice conservative financial management, why we continue to recapitalize our strategic resources such as the MCF, and why we continue to maintain our unrelenting focus on responsible, disciplined spending. Pilots are results-oriented, and the results are in the numbers. And those numbers reflect your stewardship of our pilots' hard-earned dues dollars. Now, let's review those results. Audited results from 2017 show an operational surplus on a consolidated basis of more than $49 million. That's an $8 million increase from 2016 and is attributed, as with previous years, to increased profit-sharing payments and new contracts that have made major improvements since the bankruptcy era of a decade ago. For 2017, ALPA dues revenue was $190.2 million. Looking at ALPA's expenses for the year, flight pay loss incurred was $37.8 million, a 6.2% increase over 2016, attributable again to improved contracts at several MECs. Office and administrative expenses totaled $22.9 million. Professional services and other expenses of $11.9 million, a slight increase. And employee-related costs totaling $70.7 million, which also reflects a slight increase, and travel-related expenses that remained relatively level. Currently, we have consolidated operating surplus of $36.2 million. That's a little below the total I reported at last year's executive board, but it's also one fewer month as we met in October last year, and the year-to-date numbers ran through August 31st rather than July 31st this year. But you can extrapolate loosely what we might see for the rest of 2018 based on last year's August 31st total of $40.4 million and the end-of-year total seen here of $49.1 million. As you can see here, we are continuing to increase our budgeted dues and our actual dues. This has been moving in a positive direction since 2009, as this chart shows. And we expect similar movement this year as well. You'll note as well the gap between the projected dues and actual dues, which is yet another sign of the conservative budgeting that has allowed us to recapitalize our finances and has contributed to our current solid financial footing. Understand, though, that while we've exceeded projections the last few years, this will eventually level off, so we continue to be responsible and conservative to account for the cyclical nature of our industry. I'm happy to report that last month, ALPA's Executive Council unanimously approved next year's budget. For 2019, we're planning for $204.3 million in dues income, which is an 11.8% increase over the amount in 2018. It's important to note that with this budget, the association continues to advance our strategic priorities and support our pilot groups involved in contract negotiations and mergers. The revenue growth in 2019 is being driven by improved contracts, modest growth, profit sharing, and the continued addition of new pilot groups. The Administrative and Support Account, or A&S account, funds ALPA National committees, departments, and operations, and expenses cover employee salaries, property rental and maintenance, governing bodies and national committee flight pay loss costs, and meeting expenses. As you know, the A&S account is ALPA's largest account, and the $88.7 million budget for 2019 represents a modest 8.2% increase over last year. This slide highlights our financial performance through July 31st, 2018. $124 million in income with close to $88 million in expenses has generated a year-to-date surplus of $36.2 million. Again, not as high as last year's report because it includes just one fewer month. Now, this slide provides a more detailed breakdown of the various sources of this year's income, as they compare to the association's largest expense categories. As mentioned earlier, ALPA continues to operate with a surplus. This year, just like last year, we are expecting increased revenue as compared to our budget estimate for A&S income, but we're also witnessing a decrease in actual expenses compared to budget estimates. Thanks to that combination, we've almost doubled our anticipated surplus, demonstrating the continued prudent use of our pilots' hard-earned dues dollars in representing their interests. ALPA's Operating Contingency Fund, or OCF, is a sinking fund with surpluses that are carried forward year over year. The OCF also receives 3.5% of dues income through ALPA's annual spending limit policy allocations. Thanks to your continued focus on financial discipline, the OCF fund balance continues to move in a positive direction. There has been steady growth and stabilization in the fund over the past decade, and it allowed us to transfer $7 million to help further recapitalize the major contingency fund last year while still trending upward, as you can see on this chart. Now, the OCF is divided into three sub-funds: the operating fund, the contingency fund, which is the largest portion by far, and the special projects fund. As I alluded to a moment ago, both the operating fund and the contingency fund offer MECs a source of supplemental financing when pilot groups are engaged in contract negotiations or facing other extraordinary circumstances. The current balance of $20.7 million as of July 31st will ensure that MECs have supplemental funds available to them to meet their pilot group's goals and objectives. This slide provides some statistics on year-to-date use of the operating and contingency fund allocations for 2018. 11 pilot groups have been granted operating fund allocations totaling nearly $3.1 million this year, though only $333,000 of that amount has been used thus far, reflecting a significantly reduced burn rate as compared to prior year results. The major contingency fund continues to be the association's most visible strategic asset, and the Board of Directors has endorsed initiatives to protect and enhance this fund. As you can see from the chart, our efforts are taking hold with an upward trend from 2015 onward. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done in this area, but this is a positive step forward. Through the first 7 months of 2018, MCF expenses totaled $320,000, with 4 pilot groups receiving allocations. As these MECs are again in the end game of negotiations, we can expect MCF-related expenses to increase, though we will also be dropping JetBlue off the list in recognition of their latest contract. You'll also notice here a $1 million expenditure for Keep Flying Safe that was approved by the Executive Board earlier this year. That's our effort against Section 744 of FAA reauthorization that seeks to pursue single pilot operations. The MCF bylaws allow for expenditures in unforeseen and unbudgeted advocacy campaigns, so we're using those funds to do all that we can to combat this attempt. Hopefully this scene looks very familiar to you. It's our new financial dashboard for MECs, and it's meant to simplify the information you're getting and allow you to find what you need quickly and accurately with both numbers and charts. Tableau's account status report delves a little deeper for you, providing the important figures that you need. For example, the top 5 expenses by category, year-to-date information, high-level summary of income and expenses of MECs, includes income based on actual dues income received by ALPA, and includes the actual expenses incurred by your MEC. On this insurance slide, there are some big changes coming to ALPA insurance that you should be aware of. Starting in October, we'll be transitioning from an open enrollment period to a year-round enrollment period. That means your members will be able to sign up for ALPA insurance at any point during the year, not just during the brief open enrollment period each fall. The same goes for our, quote, step-up promotion that allows pilots to increase their coverage. And finally, we're doing our due diligence in reviewing our loss of license and life coverage to make sure that it meets the needs of our pilots and their families. If you have any questions about ALPA's insurance offerings, you can email at insurance@alpa.org for details. And finally, we come to the proposed dues reduction. Back in April, the Executive Council recommended a dues decrease rate from 1.9% to 1.85% effective in the year 2020. To give you an idea of the effects of such a change, if that were applied to our 2019 budget, we'd have approximately $5.3 million less in budgeted dues, with resultant reductions in the average MEC income seen here. We'll be talking about this in greater detail in Delegate Committee 1 later today. Financial advisor Suze Ormond once said, "Every financial worry you want to banish and financial dream you want to achieve comes from taking tiny steps today that put you on a path towards your goals." Well, during our recovery from the economic downturn in the late 2000s, we've taken hundreds of tiny steps. Each decision you make with your finances is one tiny step. Each prudent budget passed is one tiny step. Each responsible purpose is one tiny step. And you can see on this slide just a small representation of the steps we've taken just since 2012. Every single surplus listed on this chart is up. Every single balance is listed higher. The cumulative surplus of our MECs has increased by a factor of 7, while our OCF balance and average monthly cash balance have almost quadrupled. And our consolidated operating surplus is 31 times higher than it was in 2012. Now, we have a lot of steps ahead of us, but at the same time, it's appropriate, I think, to look at how far that we've come and recognize that. ALPA is on strong financial footing because each and every one of you and your fellow volunteers, remember, it's hard enough to spend money wisely when you don't have any, but it's even harder to spend money wisely when you do. Thank you for your attention, and thank you once again for being good stewards of your pilots' hard-earned dues dollars.